It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is CEO Vernon Steiner. Vern was appointed president and CEO of State Fund in June of 2014 after nearly 3 decades in the insurance industry with companies such as AIG, CNA, and most recently Zenith Insurance, where he was Senior Vice President of Claims from 2007 to 2014. Vern received his Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from the University of California, Los Angeles, where he is both an alumni and was a Chancellor Scholar. Vernon Steiner, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Wonderful to be here. And after many tries, it's great to have you on the show. And I'm so looking forward to hearing your story. I feel, though, we already know each other so well, given the many attempts we've tried at this. So I can't wait to hear more about your background. And we always like to start in the early years. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what your early family life was like.
Sure. We were transplants from the Midwest. I think I was 2 years old when my parents picked up and left Iowa and moved to Southern California. And
all right. Where in Iowa?
I was born in Iowa City. I think we lived in West Branch at the time.
So were
kind of
parents
small
farmers
town.
Or what brought them to that part of the country?
No, my mother's family had some farming and ranching in their history. My dad was a truck driver back then, I believe.
Oh, right.
And I think he just got tired of the weather out there. And it was a time when a lot of people were moving to California. And
those winters can be long and hard,
absolutely.
I'm sure.
In fact, my only memory pre-California is actually a pretty good memory. Is I remember building a snowman with my father. I don't know.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know if he told me about it and I remember it, or if I actually have an earlier than 2-year-old memory. So.
Well, my mother's family were farmers in Iowa as well, so I can definitely identify and share that background. Brothers and sisters, Vern?
I have one brother, 2 years younger than me, Robert, and he's up in Washington now. He's a utility lineman for electric company up there.
Yeah, got it. And Dad continued his truck driving when he came out west?
No, he changed. He became a welder, and he did that pretty much the rest of his career. And I used to think, well, my dad must be the best welder there is.
That's right. Absolutely. And Mom was stay at home bringing up you boys?
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. And, what were some of the early memories that you have, other than building the snowman, that maybe inspired you from Mom and Dad, or things that they might have said or told you growing up?
Well, my mom in particular, she took a very close interest in my education and I guess in just shaping who I became. I remember these days people make fun of me for how competitive I am. Everything, is a competition, even if it's just against myself. And I remember early on my mom telling me, anything they can do, you can do better. Now, I'm not sure that's the parenting that I would take, but it must have stuck because I really am a very competitive person. Early in my life, it was more school related. These days, it's, certainly career, but that's a different way of competing, just how well we can do. But my personal life, I do a lot of cycling, particularly mountain biking, and no way am I good enough to be competitive, but I can compete against myself, right? Every time I do it, I can try to do better than I did the last time. And I know that came from my mom and her drilling that into me early on, teaching me to read before kindergarten, those kinds of things.
Yeah, awesome. Anybody else? Anything particular from Dad, or were there other coaches or teachers that inspired you?
With my dad, the inspiration really was more just how incredibly even keeled he was. Just by watching by example, life would happen, and he never let it get to him or change his attitude very much. And I really admired that. There were some other influences in my early life where they were much more volatile, but Dad was kind of a steady rock. And I tried, I don't know whether it was consciously or certainly later in my life, I realized, that's kind of the way to approach things. You can't really control everything that's going on around you, but you can exert control over how you let it impact you. And
that's so true. Yeah. Fantastic. Were you a good student in school?
I was a very good student.
That competitiveness,
competitiveness, exactly. Yeah, that's
top of your class, perhaps.
Certainly in the early years, and one of the top two, which really frustrated me in high school. There was someone else who finished above me. Yeah. He was a good friend of mine.
Well, it's good to have a competitor sometime, though, right?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
And what about entrepreneurial things? Anything that you did growing up? Did you have the ubiquitous paper route, sold Christmas cards, other types of things at certain times of year? So mowed the lawns, perhaps?
Well, interestingly, I didn't make this connection till later, but being from the Midwest, when it was time to start playing organized sports, my parents coached a bowling league. So I spent a lot of time at the bowling alley. And I think about 9 years old, I started keeping score for the adult leagues and tournaments. And it was really quite lucrative. I remember I used to get
they paid you for it. That's awesome.
I used to get 50 cents a person for league and $1 a person for tournaments. And if somebody won a tournament, they'd give me a big old tip. And I was 9 years old.
Gosh, that's great.
But that's the start of, automation kind of did away with those jobs because nowadays bowling alleys, they keep score for you automatically.
It's all red. Oh, that's terrific. And were you a bowler as well?
I did. I bowled a great deal in those early years and continued to bowl with my dad up through college.
Nice. Ever do a 300 perfect score?
No. I did have a 279 once, which was
279. That beats me. I think 259 was my tops. But I've always enjoyed bowling. In fact, we still do that as a family when the kids come home. They go, we're going to go bowling again. And then big smiles on their faces. It's a fun family sport.
Absolutely. I'm not so sure how I was going to say, I'm not so sure how healthy it was with the secondhand smoke you could get in bowling alleys back in those days.
In those days, I can imagine. Right.
Who knew?
Oh, goodness. Well, who knew? That's right. What about other types of things outside of class, Vern? What type of sports, music, theater, debate, anything like that?
I did some theater in high school, and I really enjoyed that. I wouldn't say I was that great at it. I also dabbled in lots of sports, basketball, tennis, music. I have absolutely no talent whatsoever. And my wife reminds me of that somewhat regularly.
Yeah, don't sing unless you're in the shower on your own, right? I've had that before.
I can't tell you how many times actually my sister-in-law I'll be singing a song and she'll say, "Who sings that?" And I fall for it and then tell her who's the actual artist is. And she says, "Well, why don't you let them do it?"
Oh, gosh. Oh, that's great. I won't share that with my daughter because I'm sure she'd give that to me all the time. Oh, my goodness. I love it. Any other jobs other than keeping score at the bowling alley that you did while you're, in high school or maybe into the college years?
Yeah, absolutely. I early on in my neighborhood, there was this fellow who was running a machine shop out of his garage. And so I went to work for him, basically mass producing parts, and did that for a couple of years.
Really?
And then after that, I got a job at a key shop outside of a Sears back in the days when, that was like the store and there was a parking lot around it. And I worked in one of those key shop kiosks. That was a great job to be able to study. And every now and then someone come up and order a key. And then when I went to college, I worked in the food service operation
Okay.
of the dorm that
Yeah.
I lived in my freshman year.
Nice, nice. So prior to college, it sounds like you had some lucrative jobs. I'm sure the machine shop was good, and of course, all those tips at the bowling alley. What did you spend those funds on? Was that, put it in the piggy bank and wait for a rainy day, or were there some hobbies, or some things that you treated yourself with as you were growing up?
Well, it was interesting growing up. We didn't have a lot of money. My dad often in the early 80s was laid off. The economy was bad, and the manufacturing economy was changing over. So,
Sure.
And given the types of classes I was in, the other students and friends that I made, they kind of lived on the proverbial other side of the tracks. So I ended up, oddly, all the great things they got to do with their families, the trips to Europe or the car they got, I wasn't going to get that. But I always had money to pay for us to go to the movies. They didn't have the spending money, but I had the money in my pocket. But I did buy my first car when I was like just turned 15 and had a year. Then of course I couldn't drive it, but I had a year to try to fix it up and make it look good. I never actually got to the point where it looked good. It was a combination of paint and primer and Bondo for my entire high school career.
Oh, that's great. Well, college probably wasn't a preordained, given it sounds like Dad likely didn't go, right? Or was he? Yeah. And did Mom at all? Did she go beyond high school in her earlier years?
No. My parents, I think I was the first one from certainly the immediate family. I had a cousin who might have gone to college a year or two before me, but
Did Mom and Dad encourage you? Was that kind of part of their American dream to provide that for you? Or was it something that was more self-motivated?
I think Mom encouraged me tremendously, everything that had to do with education. And the
competitiveness,
right? And frankly, because of the kinds of the different ways of life I was exposed to going to school, I actually lived in an area that was kind of economically depressed, but the school had so many feeder neighborhoods, and I was in the classes with people from literally the other side of the tracks. And I realized early on.
Now this was high school or at UCLA?
No, this was pre-UCLA. It was high school where this
junior high school years, right?
Yeah, and I realized, wow, the way to go and live the kinds of life these other people live is through education. And so I
interesting.
Set a goal early on to go to college. And originally, I think I was watching an episode of Perry Mason or something that said, I want to be a lawyer. That didn't actually happen, but that was my goal from, I think, fourth grade.
Yeah. So that led you to your field of study. What made you choose UCLA and study philosophy?
Well, UCLA was it was a great school, and it was a good financial decision. Some of the scholarships I got went a lot further at a public school in state than they would have gone had I chosen another school. And growing up in Southern California, big fan of the basketball team and all of those things. So
and the in-state tuition as well.
Yes, that was a lot. That was the biggest motivation. And
were you on an academic scholarship? Was it sports? It
was academic. Yeah, I had.
Awesome.
I pretty much competed for every scholarship I could get because I needed them in order to go to school. And I got some from the school, some from the Alumni Association. Our school district, our high school district sponsored scholarships that were worth a lot more if you went to one of the in-state schools, and various other, whether it be the local Elks competition or a PTA scholarship,
Lions
all
Club
those things. Exactly. So
cool. And so philosophy, tell us about that. Was that due to your interest in the law at that time, or what made you choose that field of study?
Well, I started off and I thought I'm going to be a computer science major, but I'm going to take a different route. I'm going to do language and computer science. And I still planned on becoming an attorney, but I thought that combination would be great. And one of the early classes I had to take was a logic course, which was a philosophy course. And I just fell in love with it. You
loved it.
Yeah. It's all about arguing. Yeah, and
Right.
if you talk to my wife, she'll tell you I love to argue. I don't call it arguing. I think it's really
It's
examining.
discussion.
Exactly. But she calls it arguing. So
I love it.
But it just fell in love with it. So I said, well, let me take another class in this. And next thing you knew, I was taking ethics classes and metaphysics classes, and I'd gotten so deep into it. I said, I'm just going to major in philosophy. That should still be a good major.
It's just really your love of the field.
Exactly.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. And so did you still kind of at the time of your finishing up your bachelor's still plan to go to law school? Did you take the LSAT and were on that trajectory, or did that shift at some point during your undergraduate years?
It shifted. It was interesting. And I have great respect for the law, and a couple of my best friends are attorneys. But I came to this realization that the ethics of the bar were not the ethics I wanted for myself. I think they're really important ethics for our society, but I didn't necessarily want to represent a client if that client's beliefs and behaviors weren't aligned with mine. Even if they're right to have those beliefs and behaviors is absolutely something that needed to be defended, I didn't really want to be put in that. I was worried I'd be too good at it and I would lose my own ethics in this greater. Yes.
Yeah. It's so funny you share that with me. Just today, one of my best friends whose son went to Vanderbilt Law, got a great degree, had worked in social justice when he was an intern and his undergraduate, loved it, and then went to work for one of the top law firms in New York. Told him last night he rates it on a scale of 1 to 10 as a 1. And is just super unhappy, but, sees it as an opportunity to pay back those student loans and grants and deeds. But, it's unfortunate that profession does have the reputation of not particularly the highest level of ethics and integrity.
Right. And even when I think that when they're following the ethics of their profession, it's not necessarily what the everyday American would think, well, that's the right thing or wrong thing. I understand them, but other folks have to carry that particular banner. I decided I didn't want to carry that banner.
It wasn't for you.
Yes.
Yeah. So what was the first job you took out of college, Vern?
Well, I was actually in claims, adjusting claims. And
right in the insurance business. Yeah.
And it gave me a taste of law, and it gave me a taste of medicine, and it gave me a taste of social work all at the same time. It was interesting. Were you an inspector, or were you on the phone, or kind of did a combination of both? It started on the phone, and shortly thereafter was an outside adjuster, which means I would, after an event, I would go out and take statements
like
and
an
do an investigation.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
It was
terrific.
A lot of fun. Something new every day, dealing with people, the time just went by so quickly. And I had spent the last several years working in a food service operation where sometimes it seemed like the clock didn't move. That I was looking
right.
I was looking something that would be engaging and mentally challenging and with variety, and it certainly had that. It also offered a great opportunity to make a difference. I mean, you're in a position where people need help, and you can actually provide that help. That was one of the things that attracted me to it early on. Interestingly, one of my first interviews, I got really interested in it, went through multiple interviews with this organization, and they called me at the end and said, we decided to go with someone else. Actually, it was they were using a recruiter, and I said, why? And they said, there's something you said in one of your interviews that they just thought your needs wouldn't be met. And I said, well, what was it? They said, you said that your battery got recharged by helping people, and they thought that this wouldn't be the job for you. So, which meant that wasn't the company for me, because
that was a reflection of their culture.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Oh my goodness. Well, we won't name that company, but I probably have dealt with their insurance claim folks in the past.
You may have.
Because believe me, I've run into that from time to time. I think we all have. Well, isn't that amazing? Good for you to have asked that question too. Was that in your 20s? Was that early on?
That was in my early 20s. Yes.
Mm-hmm. No kidding. Fantastic. Well, in the jobs that you did take, then, did you have leadership responsibilities early on?
I did. I got into the field and was probably less than a year before I had my first supervision opportunity. I had been managing a student manager in the food service operation at UCLA. So I'd had some years of leadership
managing people,
and I got an early opportunity. I was fortunate and moved into a supervisor role and loved it. I love the combination of having the technical work and also being able to groom people, work with them, help them realize their best selves.
Yeah, fantastic. What were some of the earliest leadership lessons you learned from, bosses and mentors, good or bad?
Yeah.
And you don't need to mention the names of the companies or the bad ones, but sometimes that observational lesson learning can be helpful too.
So the amazing thing is some of the biggest leadership lessons I learned in food service. I worked as a part-time student supervisor in
at UCLA.
At UCLA, Dykstra Hall dormitory. And there was a time when I was just really kind of unhappy. And I didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about why. It was just, very uneasy. And then the person I reported to, who actually had been a friend, got promoted, and I got a new manager. And my entire life changed. And the lesson from that, and the new manager was consistent, reliable. There was no volatility. You knew what to expect. And I walked away from that and I said, I'm a student. This is not what I'm going to be doing, 3 years from now. I don't do this full time. Right. And the impact this manager had on my life was so profound that I was unhappy, not only at work, but I was unhappy outside of work. And that lesson, that the incredible impact that a manager, your direct supervisor, has on not only the quality of your work life, but how that impacts everything else, that stuck with me and is something that I've kept in mind every day of my work life from then.
How long did you work for that person?
I was probably working for that person for about 2 years. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah. And it also had a cumulative effect, right? And
I can imagine.
It was amazing. In that same environment, I learned we had another change in management, and a new senior manager came into the food service operation. And at that point, we were all pretty happy. We had a good team. There was a silly competition about which dorm was the best one on the hill, and we were sure it was us. And this new manager came in from one of the other operations and started changing everything. And really didn't involve people, didn't explain what he was doing. Morale went down. People started to leave. I needed the job, so I stuck around. About a year later, I realized that all the changes actually made sense and they worked and things were working better. Whether it was moving a sink or doing something else, but it wasn't good enough to be right. The way you do things and how you involve people and the respect you show for them when you ask for their input or you explain why you're doing what you're doing has a huge impact on.
Absolutely.
And again, these are lessons I learned as a student working in a food service operation, but they were leadership lessons.
Right. Fantastic. Well, let's talk a little bit about your insurance career. We know from the bio that you're CEO of State Fund, which is kind of an interesting organization, kind of quasi-private, quasi-public, right? If that's the right way to describe it. But you spend a lot of time working for large corporations, wonderful insurance companies like AIG and CNA. How did you kind of know that was the right direction for you? Because you've been 20 years in the insurance industry.
I think it's right on 29 now. And
wow. Going into the third decade.
Right. Initially, it was just the interest of the work. The joke in the insurance industry is no one actually plans on going into insurance, and almost every story I've heard from everyone I've talked to, it wasn't a plan, but it happened, and it works well for some people. And I
Well,
think
it tends to be one of the industries that people do stay in for decades. I mean,
Right.
as you know, I've recruited in it, and we know some common people as well that have worked in the industry. In fact, one of your predecessors. But, I found, particularly with my insurance clients, they really only want people that have worked in the insurance industry. It's one of those few industries where I do, fortunately have the experience, but I know I need to look for people that come from insurance industries, whereas a lot of other industries you can look at parallels, right? But there is something quite unique about the insurance industry where it tends to really only breed its own, so to speak, right?
Yeah, I think that is very true. Yes.
A lot of promote from within, and people kind of come up through the ranks and stay longer term. Were you ever tempted to wander outside, or did you just always kind of enjoy, the business starting in claims and then moving into, greater responsibility as your career progressed?
I wasn't tempted because I was always interested. I was never bored and
curious.
Yeah, exactly. And there was always the next opportunity in the business. So no, it was very good fortune for me to learn about this field and then have the opportunity to get into it.
Yeah. And is it about 10, 15 years at AIG? That was probably one of the longer periods of employment, correct?
It was about 10. I think it was about right around 9 that I was at AIG. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds like you had increasing levels of responsibility there. CNA, if I'm not mistaken, is it slightly smaller than AIG, or is it about the same size? Right. So tell. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. It certainly was then. When I was at AIG, it was when AIG was
huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that transition. Many of the folks in the audience work for middle market companies or want to in the future, but many of them, like yourself and myself, worked in larger companies earlier on before they kind of, moved in. Was that a big challenge for you, the shift of working for a large CIG to a smaller CNA?
No, actually, it was just the opposite. Another kind of lesson when I got the position at AIG, I loved it, and I thought, this is the company I'm going to work at for the rest of my career. And I moved up relatively quickly, and I thought, this is my dream job. At that point, I was a regional vice president. I had no desire, and I didn't think my family had any desire to move to New York, the home office. So I thought, this is the job for me. But things change, cultures change in organizations, leaders change, and I started to not like the kind of leadership and the position that I was in as really a middle manager of relaying the reality in the field to home office and then implementing home office's ultimate direction in the field. When you take a leadership position, you need to advance the goals and agenda of the organization, but you hope that you work for an organization that is listening. And you're never going to find a situation where absolutely everything that the senior leadership team wants you to do aligns perfectly with what you want to do.
Of course.
But as long as it's enough, it's fine. And you understand that that's, you don't get to have your way all the time. And it got to the point when I was at AIG where I thought, I actually don't feel good anymore about this. And
they went through quite a transformation.
Right. For me, this was before that. I left AIG in about 2003, which turned out to be incredibly good fortune because, had I stayed another 4 or 5 years or so, I had some great friends who were very much damaged by the difficulty they went through. So when I went to CNA, it was, even though it was still a large organization, 10,000 people, the culture was different. The level of trust and leadership was different. The organization was not nearly as financially healthy, and there were some then some difficult challenges that they were trying to tackle. But I felt more empowered to tackle them, and the job actually became more rewarding and easier. And it's I think a lesson in management philosophy. You hire a bunch of talented people, but if you have a culture that is completely controlling and untrusting, then those people are not going to flourish. And I often felt like I was doing things with one hand tied behind my back at AIG. Well, after I left, I thought, no, it was two hands tied behind my back.
Once you saw another environment where you could flourish. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, and then 7 years at Zenith. And if I'm, again, not mistaken, Zenith, again, was smaller than CNA.
Yes.
That's correct. And didn't they ultimately become part of Liberty Mutual, or was Zenith sold to someone else?
They were sold to Fairfax, a Canadian company.
That's right.
Yes.
And, got it.
Yeah.
And again, was the attraction kind of smaller pond but bigger fish, or what was the kind of motivation to join Zenith at the time you did?
There were two motivations. I really enjoyed my role at CNA, but they had asked me to move to Chicago, and I was commuting to Chicago, and the deal was, okay, when your son
kids are out of school,
gets out of school, you're going to have to move here, which was probably fine with me, but not so fine with my family. And although I probably would have done it, and I was recruited to come work for Zenith. And so the two things that attracted me to Zenith was it was headquartered in California, so I wouldn't have to disrupt my family's life as much, or wouldn't be faced with that choice as frequently. And also it had just a reputation unparalleled for being a quality insurance organization. And it's very rewarding to be associated with a brand that is respected. And
right. And then you went back to the claims area, kind of where you started.
I did.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Fantastic. And did you leave the time of the acquisition then when you left in 2014, or were you recruited to State Fund, to become their CEO before that transition?
It was actually later. The acquisition, if I remember, the acquisition was in 2011.
So that took place earlier.
Right.
Okay.
And the acquisition,
stayed through that.
I did. And it was one of the most seamless, well done acquisitions you can imagine.
Those can be painful.
Right.
So that's great.
The philosophy seemed to be of Fairfax was, we're going to acquire good companies with good people and allow them to run themselves, right? And
good for them.
And I think Fairfax then is an organization that really focuses on how they invest the resources. And of course, insurance companies collect premium up front and then pay it out over time. And so their investment strategy, buying insurance companies, worked well for their investment strategy. And they had a pretty, I think, evolved way of getting those companies to collaborate, but leaving the cultures intact if they approved of the culture.
Sure. Awesome. Well, that's a sign of a good acquirer, right?
Yes.
When they buy a good company that's run well, let the people continue. If anything, give them more freedom to continue to do well. And then in 2014, were you tapped by a recruiter to come over to State Fund, or how did that opportunity come about?
I was. I got a call from a recruiter. They said, State Fund is looking for a CEO. And I knew they were because I was in California, and State Fund is the biggest work comp carrier in California.
Well, you work really close with them. Right. Yeah.
And at that time, I would tell you honestly, I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago before that call from the recruiter with a colleague, and to demonstrate how well or not well I knew myself, I said to the colleague, I think I'd have to be desperate and unemployed to take that job, because it had been years of State Fund had been through years of difficulties, cultural challenges, and some things just by virtue of who the organization is, stepping up when the market collapsed and having to do that inside of a structure, a civil service structure that didn't really allow
dealing
for
with
it.
the politics of it.
All of those things.
Right. Well, the governor's basically your boss, right? Isn't it? Or ultimately?
The governor, yes. He appoints, or he or
the
she.
The governing committee.
Yeah, they appoint the board, or 9 out of the 11 board members. And it is more attached to politics than I'd ever dreamed any other insurance company could be. But then I got the call, and I realized, well, okay, there's that competitive element to me.
Sure.
Well, maybe I can do this. Yeah, but I decided, I'd learned early in my career that when when opportunities knock, you shouldn't disregard them. You should consider them.
Answer the door.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I went up and I interviewed, I think it was actually my second interview, one of the board members asked me, Vern, what do you think the role of state fund should be? And, in my private sector experience, we had always said, well, state funds should just be the carrier of last resort, and they should stay out of it for everyone else because they just mess up the market. Of course, that was kind of self-serving. I was pretty sure that would be the wrong answer, but I hadn't really thought about it until that moment, and it occurred to me that if a good, healthy state fund could make the system better for everyone, and at that moment, I realized I'll never have an opportunity to make as big a difference, in my career as taking on a challenge like this. And then I started to really want it. Because right. With that type of thinking. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, tell us, how has your leadership style evolved over time through all these companies and these evolutions with higher levels of responsibility? I guess the biggest lesson that I've learned over time, it has been about really listening. It's easy to say that, I listen and I value input, but so many of us have leadership examples, the people that led us. And when I started those 2 years at UCLA, right, exactly. And even if you don't behave on an interpersonal level like that, or maybe you're not as volatile, when I started my career at Crawford and Company as an adjuster, the senior leaders would come out and they'd visit an office and they'd spend most of their time, if not all of their time, with management. And they wouldn't really engage with the staff. And so that's the model I saw. And that's the model I started to follow when I got promoted to be a regional vice president in a home office. And then one day I thought, because I looked at some employee survey results, and in my in my area, and the survey results were good. At the time I was at Zenith, and generally they a great culture. But in my area of the organization, it was very interesting. The question was asked, the most senior leadership of this organization is, I forget the exact question, but basically engaged. I trust them. And then they define the senior leadership as the CEO, CFO, president. And in my area of the organization, which had the most people, the score was like 4 or 5 points lower than in other areas of the organization. Wow. And I thought, well, how could that be? They're the same senior leaders for the whole organization. Yeah.
Why do they have a lower view?
Why are they seen that way? So I decided to go out and, as I visited offices that year, to sit down and just spend time with every single employee in claims. 20, 30 minutes. I think it scared people quite a bit initially, because
probably your senior management too.
Maybe them, but the people who had to go and sit down with the senior vice president, and that's a lesson right there. You shouldn't be so scary, right?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. That's a reflection of the culture right there.
You need to humanize yourself, because as soon as you become a title, that's what you become to people, unless you try really hard to let them to get to know you, and then you have to get to know them. And when you do that, the kinds of input you get, the things that you think you've executed, the plan that you came up with in the ivory tower, and then relayed to the next level of management, then got relayed to the next level of management, that by the time it's executed, phone
game, right?
By the time it's executed, it's not at all what you wanted.
It's not recognizable.
But no one's telling you that, because they think you want to, that all you want to hear is that your plan worked. So you go out and you interact with people and build trusting relationships, and you get the truth. And then you're empowered.
What did you discover? What were some of the things that you learned?
Over the years, I've learned so many things, but
specifically in that approach with sitting down with claims, what were some of the high points of what they told you?
The amount of time that people were spending on a particular process, which was a great idea when the organization decided we need this process. And I think it actually led to higher quality, but the process had taken over. And now it was process for process sake. and not really. People had forgotten why the process was created in order to get a certain level of quality result. Instead, all that was being measured was the process.
And
the time that took up by just having to follow it, as opposed to accomplishing the intent of the process, which really gets back to, okay, let's trust people and empower them.
Yeah.
And also, if they choose to do something a different way and it works, that's fine.
Reward them.
It's reward them. Yeah. If they're empowered to do something a different way, they're also accountable for making it be the right decision that works. So that level of eye-opening, and it actually changed some of the agenda that we had, for a great deal of the agenda we had for how we were spending technology resources, rather than hard coding these processes into our systems. We said, wait a minute, we need to step back, because what we're doing today, might not be the right answer for tomorrow, and we need more flexible systems in this way. And all that came from just talking to people. And guess what?
Yeah.
The next year, when that same survey was asked, our scores were like 4 points higher than the rest of the organization.
Oh, goodness, right. So someone was listening. I love it.
And it would have been so easy for me to say, well, that CEO and president and CFO, they're just not treating claims the way they're treating everyone else.
Yeah.
Well, it has nothing to do with that, right? It's people paint leadership with a broad brush, and every leader is that direct supervisor, that next level. What you do impacts the entire way the people that you're responsible for perceive the organization.
Yeah. So true. Well, Vern, the time's flying by, but we have a couple other questions I want to make sure we cover. Now at State Fund, you're obviously running a big organization. How many employees in total?
About 4,400.
Wow. Fantastic. And of course, you cover the length and breadth of the state and hopefully are achieving those goals that you told that board member, right?
Right.
With regards to becoming that. What do you look for when, you're making bets on the people you invest in and hire?
That's a great question. The easy answer is I look for attitude and talent. You talked earlier about how we as an industry tend to value insurance-specific experience.
Right.
It's great if you come to us with the right experience that we can, learn from what you've done, but it's the culture we're trying to build, the way that you treat people, and the thinking, and maybe this comes from my background and being a philosophy major, but the critical thinking that you bring to the picture, those two things together, when I think culture is the engine that drives any organization, and the way that people treat each other, the respect they have for each other, the courage they have to disagree, but to do it in a way that is about the issue and not about the people.
Constructive, not destructive.
It's all about relationships. I mean, humanity is all about relationships, and I look for people who are great at relationship building.
Fantastic. Vern, last question. And, we've got a lot of folks who are, 10, 15 years behind us in their own careers and, kind of looking at this podcast as a way in which they can learn career points and tips on how to advance their career. And, what career or life advice would you give someone who's maybe got their eyes on the C-suite or perhaps the corner office like yourself?
I think I'd say two things. One is that it takes a lot of luck, to get the opportunities to come in the sequence you need to get here. But you have to be ready for the luck. So you do what you can do, make sure people know what you're interested in, be ready for it. And you just never know. You might think that the next opportunity is 15 years away and can happen in 15 days, but you have to be ready for it. And
case in point, you never thought you'd be CEO of State Fund.
Absolutely right. And I would say that's happened to me multiple times in my career, where I would think, oh gosh, this person ahead of me in line is never going to leave, and then something happens and an opportunity comes up, and if you're not ready, it might not come up for another 15 years.
That's right. Yeah.
So
yeah,
I think, control what you can control there, and always be ready, and don't be afraid of letting people know what your interest is, without making demands that become unreasonable. And then the other thing is, it's always about what you can give, not what you're entitled to. It's, all of us have the opportunity to show our value and make ourselves so helpful to our organization, to our particular boss, to the chain of command, that they understand that there's value there. And we don't really have, we're not entitled to anything. We have to earn it. And sometimes people feel like, I've been here and it's my turn. And if you're not getting it, you got to look in the mirror and say, why not? And it's not always, when you look in the mirror, it's not always you. But why are you staying there? If it's not you, I mean, you're still part of that equation. Then you have to go and put yourself in a situation where you feel like it can work for you. Otherwise, we spend way too much of our time at work, and the more of your time you put into work, the more of your ego is tied to your success at work, and you shouldn't give that control over to someone else. You have to take control of your own destiny.
It's not about visibility or even longevity. It's about contributions, but also enjoying the ride, right? It's not necessarily the destination. It's the journey.
Oh, that's absolutely true. Every time I've reached the destination, there's this moment of wow, and then there's what now? So I have to figure out what the new journey is. Yes.
Right. Well, Vernon Steiner, President and CEO of State Fund, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office today.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.